which is, I think it's actually devastating.
Yeah.
And I kind of had a moment where I realised this, but it's, I'd sort of probably lived that way for like 5 or 6 years, I think. I was just like, what am I doing? This isn't a part of who I am.
Welcome everyone to our newest podcast. I have with me the very distinguished Mivy James, Director of Transformation Change at BAE Systems and also founder of Gender Balance Network in BAE. Very great to see you, Mivy.
Thanks for having me.
How was your holiday since we last spoke?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Although it does seem like a lifetime ago now. This is the beginning of the summer, and given that it's extremely autumnal, it's definitely feels like a distant memory, but it was super. Thank you.
Fantastic. Holidays do have that sort of end too quickly, and then they're almost in the background, way in the past. But it's great to see you. So just as a background to everyone, what we're trying to do here is to get an insight into what Mark Sattin is doing in the forefront of diversity and inclusion. We are trying to drive an initiative to present up to 40% women to our clients for executive search hires. This is going to be a 3-year initiative, but as well as doing that, we are trying to do other things. We are trying to make sure that people change how they perceive women in the workplace. We have a network started by our first event last week, Strictly Mark Sattin. It was a dance-focused network where it was exclusively for women. And the idea was to make sure that women go into an executive networking event and feel at home, feel that they're in the majority, that it's something for them. And we have podcasts like this with very distinguished, very able, inspiring women to talk about the issues, their own experiences, and hopefully that would shed light to all of us. We'd also like to direct you to our market report, which will come up on the screen. Please do make a reference to that for any hiring needs that you need. It will benchmark a lot of salaries, it will talk about a lot of trends, and it's a very insightful report. So, on to this very brief interview, Mivy. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Digital Transformation Director here at BAE. I've worked in the tech industry for nearly 30 years now, which I'm kind of a little bit, vanity gets in the way of wanting to admit exactly how long I've worked in the tech industry for. My background's as a software engineer, a coder, and as I've become more senior, I think I've sort of worked with things which are bigger, so sort of more enterprise scale, but also more abstract. So I don't write code anymore, I kind of miss that in a way. And I mainly work with various government departments on their digital transformation strategies. So advising them, providing some thought leadership on really how to exploit the data well, and how to transform their organisations to be more agile, which is particularly challenging with big government departments.
Okay, thank you. Now, they say that the test for really enjoying what you do is that you would do it in your spare time. Now, I'm not quite sure how true that is, but how much do you enjoy what you do? How much is it a part of who you are?
So I think I'm very fortunate actually. I genuinely enjoy my work. I'm not one of those people who's in a job and constantly dreaming of running a pottery cafe on a beach or anything like that. I like the intellectual challenge of what I do. I like working in teams with other people, and also I think the tech industry is a very exciting place to be. Just the pace of change, which is why we talk about digital transformation now, is phenomenal. So kind of an example that I give is that back at the start of my career, I worked on what we would now call a sort of digital twin environment. And I had a room full of kit, probably about the size of the meeting room that we're in now. And actually my smartwatch that I'm wearing today has more processing power and storage than that whole room of IT kit.
Wow. Yes.
And, so that's sort of going back to the mid-90s. And so you kind of like, what's it going to be like in 30 years' time? So whilst the theory's not changed enormously, the art of the possible has. and tech is so ubiquitous now. Again, when I started my career, we didn't have internet access, we didn't have email on our desktops, you had to go to a particular shared machine to do that. And so just don't take some of the technical change for granted. Smartphones that we're looking at today haven't been around for that long. So I think the tech industry is a really fascinating place to be, and there's so many different types of jobs in it. I often feel disappointed when people are less keen on the industry. I think that's quite narrow-minded, but I definitely enjoy it, and I couldn't imagine working somewhere else, and also kind of at my age I'm thinking about what does retirement look like. I'm thinking, well, what would I do then without the challenge of the tech industry? So maybe I won't retire. Maybe I
just do something else.
Yeah, find the right kind of gig to sort of pick up on afterwards.
Well, they say every company now is a tech company in some way because it's pervaded everything that we've done in a good way, even though there are some challenges. And if you look back and you were to have a completely different career, what do you think you would have done?
The only other thing that I've ever entertained doing, which is completely unrelated, is sport.
Okay.
So when I was sort of finishing school, I did a lot of athletics, and sort of going down the route of sort of being a sports coach, athletics coach, something like that is the only other thing that I've considered really.
Okay. Well, I suppose when all this is done for you, it might be something you might go back to.
Yeah, I don't know if the knees hold up quite so well now.
I think it's a great thing to have different passions. You sort of have a job in a career in one place, and then you sort of. I usually put my laptop down and I go straight to the dance studio, which is hence the event we had last week. But that's all great and well. So when we last spoke, we talked about the challenges of perception. Society is making great strides in being more inclusive, especially in the workplace, which is great. However, there are sort of we who are classed as diverse are usually seen a certain way, and it comes out, and it sort of makes an impression. It makes us feel a certain way that's not very nice. And so I suppose the first question is, being a woman in technology, what experiences do you have of being in a sort of situation where you thought, well, they behave this way because I'm a woman, not because of my role or etc.
I think it's very difficult to kind of always call those things out, because as you said, we live in a world which isn't without bias, and one of the side effects is that we experience things every day, and because something's normal, maybe we don't always notice it. But I've always been sort of acutely aware of being often the only woman in the room in the tech industry. Most of the time it's been fine. It's been, as I said, I enjoy my job, and I wouldn't still be here if it had been sort of an ongoing bad experience. But there are definitely times when I've had to work harder to explain my credentials in a way that my male peers don't, because there's surprise at my technical background. I think that there's a lot of misconception around behaviours and traits. A thing that I've really noticed is that I'm going to deliberately use the word underrepresented groups, because we're not a minority, but we are underrepresented in the workplace, in the tech industry, and particularly in leadership. That underrepresented groups tend to get lumped together. So we're sort of seen as being this kind of almost like a Borg, and having this kind of hive mind rather than being seen as individuals. And the whole thing about creating a diverse workforce and having an inclusive workplace is treating people as individuals, not treating everybody that they're the same, or treating anybody with a particular characteristic as being the same as everybody else with that characteristic. We're all individuals, and that's something that workplaces need to think about when they are looking at their diversity and inclusion strategies.
So, excuse me, that would be great in theory. It's changing how people think is a very hard thing to do, especially with unconscious bias. There's some things that we don't know. We have our own biases, you and I, and there'll be about different things. When it comes to underrepresented groups, people might have unconscious biases, ways of seeing us that they might not even know about themselves. How hard is it to change how people think?
I think it's really hard, and I also have this kind of notion that I've always kind of thought that as a woman in tech, if I could change somebody's mind, then it would be easier for all women who come after me.
Yes.
And I've actually found that instead, what seems to happen is I get seen as an exception. So I'm not changing their biases. They're putting me outside of that bucket where they've put other women.
Okay, so she's a woman, but she's actually quite good.
I'm not a woman. I'm Mivy.
Right.
And so you sort of almost like transcend that categorization.
Right.
And early on in my career, just to kind of bring that to life a bit, I used to sort of sometimes get told when I was in sort of software dev teams, "Oh, you're not like other girls," and they sort of meant it as a compliment, but actually it's a deeply sexist thing to say. Having never worked with another coder who happens to be a woman on a day-to-day basis before, I'd be maybe the first one they'd worked with. And instead of kind of maybe thinking, I've got these biases about what women in the workplace are like and what kind of capabilities women have, they would separate me from the group of women and see me as something other and see me as an individual. So it's sort of helped me as an individual, but it on a kind of a personal level, I felt like I was letting women down because I wasn't, all the effort I was putting into busting those stereotypes and those misconceptions wasn't helping other women the way I hoped.
Okay.
And it also seeped into kind of my subconscious in that I became kind of almost part of the problem in a way. I became very self-conscious about femininity, and I went through like a long period. It shouldn't matter what you wear at work, but I went through a long period of kind of dressing in a more masculine way. I tried to defeminize myself because somewhere into my subconscious it seeped that in order to be taken seriously, I had to be less of a woman, which I think is actually devastating.
Yes.
And I kind of had a moment where I realised this, but it's I'd sort of probably lived that way for like 5 or 6 years, I think. Where I was just like, what am I doing? This isn't a part of who I am. I'm being less of myself in the workplace, and it affected my personality. I was sort of more serious, and because I thought I had to be serious to be taken seriously, and all of these things. And again, sort of coming back to that idea of an inclusive workplace. It wasn't inclusive because I was in an environment where I felt obliged to be not myself.
Right.
And I suspect that my story is not unique. It's just that I kind of had that moment where I realised what I had done to myself because of the things that I was being drip fed.
So what did you do to? I don't know, reverse, isn't it? What was your response to what you found about?
At that moment, I think I was actually kind of out clothes shopping, and I found myself, buying yet another kind of Hillary Clinton kind of pantsuit, and I was like, and I kind of like sort of turned and went and sort of bought some like kind of flamboyant red dress or something. It was like a symbolic thing for me, and I also thought, who am I kidding? I'm very small. I've got long hair. I definitely look feminine, and I was trying to be, someone I wasn't, so I kind of, changed how I was going to be and to be more of myself. But it takes a lot of resilience to do that when you're constantly being drip fed to these messages, and also I'd probably reached a level of seniority where I had more confidence and more self-belief in a way. So I sort of like I've earned this independence, as you probably tell from maybe the pink hair, I've carried on with that journey.
It's great. It looks great.
Thank you. Just to kind of, it almost feels like I'm making a point, and by not trying to kind of blend into the background and to fit the suppose, the stereotype of someone in tech, which is more typically a man.
Right. Now, when you made that shift, did you get any reactions? Or did you see a difference?
What I found was
Yeah.
people commented more on my what I was wearing in the workplace.
They commented more.
Yeah.
Was this more from women and men? Or?
Mainly from men.
Okay.
I suddenly, because I felt like I was being identified much more by my appearance.
Right.
And it would be just, some of it would be sarcastic comments and some of it would be compliments. And I've just I just ignored them, really. And
I'm dying for this one, if you could. And obviously you don't need to make a reference. What would be an example of a sarcastic comment?
So just, just something, maybe it's not sarcastic, but somebody sort of going, oh, that's a red dress. Yes, it is. Congrats for noticing that. It's sort of because it stands out. They have to say something. And It's like, well, I don't know why you felt obliged to say something.
Right.
It's makes you self-conscious in a way, and I just kind of you'd be thinking, well, if I don't know why that was a thing to say. They could have just not said anything. I'm not, and that happens quite a lot. I think if you stand out, if you're different, people will say something.
Yes.
And it's just like I don't know why that was a necessary thing to say.
Okay. Well. Thanks for. I mean, it's a funny thing because we will both know that try to fit in with the majority, with the stereotype of what you should be. I mean, I've had loads of conversations about how black people should tend to their hair. It's more naturally curly and so on. But I remember growing up in Kenya, spent my whole life being, we have to comb it every day to make it as straight as possible, and because that's what the standard of neatness is. I'm like, no, but that's not our hair.
Yes,
our hair is curly. It shouldn't be regarded as not neat just because it's curly. And I remember making a similar sort of a comb does not touch my hair, and I haven't done it for about 10 years. And for one, my parents can't stand it.
Really?
And it's a shared, yes. I think I can relate to that, but from a different sort of standpoint. Okay. How do we change how people think? It's not impossible. What are some of the things that we can do? It's great the reason why this is relevant is because it's great to have the sort of structural initiatives. You need to represent more women in executive hires. You need to recruit more women, have more, reduce the wage gap, etc. These are great, but the perception, what can we actually do?
So there's not a simple, straightforward thing. If there's one thing that you could do to change that, then we wouldn't be here having this conversation today. It's very complicated, and it's changing habits and behaviours. And I think it needs to be a sort of a long menu of things that happen. And I also think that there's kind of almost an impatience in organisations. Sometimes people will say, what's the one thing we can do? It's kind of like I just want to tick that box, like rolling out a piece of software or something. That's gone live, so that's done. We've done diversity. And it's this, because actually dealing with unconscious bias and dealing with kind of more, I'm not a massive fan of unconscious bias phrase because I think it sounds a bit soft, and it's sort of like, well, we've all got that, so sort of nothing to see here, move on. And I think that we need to actually take some responsibility as individuals for addressing those things. But so there's not one thing to do, but I think kind of holding each other to account collectively, so nudging each other, not making a big drama about it. There are times when things definitely need to be reported to HR that are unacceptable in the workplace, but things which are from well-meaning but clumsy, somebody it's the most effective thing is for a peer to nudge another peer, I think, and kind of go, that wasn't cool what you did there, right. And sort of and not make a big hoo-ha about it, because that makes it more difficult, I think, for people to talk about the difficult things, and I think leadership need to really role model a different set of behaviours, and that's difficult because as you know from your own initiative, the biggest gap with diversity is in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of organisations have made great strides in diversifying the talent that how they recruit into kind of entry-level roles.
Mm-hmm.
Recognising that there's systemic biases in our education system and social mobility and so on can hamper that. But we're not seeing change in leadership. And I think the first thing to note is if everybody realises that we don't notice when we're surrounded by people who are the same as us, but we notice when there's somebody different to us.
Yes.
It's kind of actually look through that with a different lens and go, oh, everybody in the room's like me today.
Mm-hmm.
That's not quite right. That's not representative of who we are as a country. But at I get this sort of feeling, I think there's a lot of evidence that backs it up as well, that the more senior a role, the more likely somebody who's the same as everyone who's gone before is to end up in that role.
Mm-hmm.
Because different is somehow seen as a risk, which I don't understand, because the assumption is that everybody who's done that role to date is wildly successful. And I think that's not quite true.
Yeah.
It's so that's the kind of area where I really want to focus. And if we just look at women in leadership for a moment, what a lot of organisations are doing now is they're recognising this gap in leadership. And they're having lots of initiatives which I think are counterproductive for diversity.
Okay.
In that they might do a women in leadership training, for example. But the sort of the messaging behind that, subliminal messaging, is that there's one way to be a leader, which is sort of very alpha masculine set of traits. And women would be more successful in the workplace if they adhered to these set of behaviours that have been laid out by the people who've held those leadership roles before them. So it actually reinforces sexism in many ways, because it's sort of like, actually I've heard somebody reference this before, that if you're kind of a fan of dance, you might be a fan of musicals. The film My Fair Lady, the main character in that, when he's sort of lamenting some challenges that he has with Eliza Doolittle in his house, is sort of sings a song about why can't a woman be more like a man.
Yes, I remember that one.
Yeah, and that's how it feels with leadership. It's sort of like women. It's kind of your fault. You'll be more successful in your careers if you behave like a man. That's not. Nobody's really saying that out loud, but it's this kind of, when you hear things like the confidence gap.
Yes.
I personally don't buy the confidence gap. I think that women are measured against a set of what confidence looks like as defined by the existing majority leadership group. And when people say things such as women only apply for jobs if they meet 10 of 10 of criteria, whereas a man would apply for the job if he meets 6 of 10 or whatever the stats are. Yeah. They're like, yes, that's, women. We need to get women to apply for jobs when they meet 6 of the 10 criteria. Women don't get jobs when they apply for 6 of 10 when they meet 6 of 10 criteria. They only get the job when they meet 11 of the 10. So it's not the system lacks confidence in women, particularly for leadership, rather than women lacking confidence in themselves. And when you look at other stats like speaking up in meetings, and there's loads of really great research on this, the actual scientific evidence goes against a lot of what people's beliefs are, particularly around the confidence gap. It's just that confidence is exhibited in different ways. And some feedback that I've had over the years has been that I'm quietly confident. People will say, oh, Mivy, you're quietly confident, and then look a bit confused because they don't know what that means. Because I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I stick to my guns when I am confident that I am right about something, but the way I express myself doesn't match this kind of, again, this very sort of alpha masculine way of kind of dominating conversations or whatever. This is my guess, and so I'm kind of a conundrum. I'm puzzling. Yes. And I just think, so when I talk about my leadership style, I deliberately say feminine leadership. Right. Because I know my, I suppose, my knowledge base, so I don't think that I'm lacking in confidence. I just sometimes when my confidence is knocked, it's because I don't fit with what I see around me.
Right.
Because I kind of, it feels like a burden when you're the only one who's like you in the room.
Yes. Okay. That's very insightful. And what is leadership missing by having few women in it?
I think it's there's been kind of sort of quite a lot that's been written around say the 2008 financial crash, and that there was sort of very much one style that sort of groupthink, and maybe the risk appetite would have been different had there been more diversity in the kind of the leaders in the financial services sector at the time. So there's very much that kind of diversity of background. But actually, I'd like to kind of turn that challenge on its head and say, why wouldn't you want to have women in leadership roles? It's this kind of, the working assumption seems to be when we make a case for diversity that things are great as they are. And I don't want to sound sort of all gloom and doom about it, but I'd sort of, my argument is I don't see that things are great as they are. If you look at some of let's not get gloomy about the world economy and things, but it is, we are in kind of a very not a great position right now. And the world leaders, particularly in the Western world, fit a particular mould. And when we have, we've got a female prime minister at the moment, but they often have adopted some very masculine traits to succeed in the world of politics. I mean, we all know that Margaret Thatcher even went on voice coaching to make her, because she had an annoying, screechy female voice, as far as people were concerned. So, so she sort of again kind of moved herself out of the group. So actually, I kind of think rather than sort of making a case for diversity, we should challenge the case for not having diversity. Like why, I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but the kind of implication being is that leadership is perfect as it is, and I don't buy that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, perfect. The analogy I used in my speech at the dancing event was when you put a couple before a judge or an audience, it's the differences it's a difference between the man and woman couple, even though the same-sex couples, that is perhaps it's a partnership that's most appealing, most magical, most powerful. And that I said there are not many worlds where I prefer to either dance my own or do things my way, or to be the partner who would be like me, and sort of use that as an analogy. I have found that helpful, especially when I will admit I do have unconscious bias. I think we all do to some extent. It's about learning and admitting that, and being open to learn. And I have found in dancing, for example, it's such a learning curve about knowing who the other person is, how they do things, what their terms are, the definitions of success, of hard work, the difference they make, and when I get things wrong. And I actually see that as applicable in it's helped me live my life.
Right.
It's just made me a learner.
Yeah.
And to admit, hey, I got this wrong, I didn't know it, or I thought I knew it, but I don't. Which is why our event is based around this theme of dance.
That's the first time I've had a dance analogy for that, but I think
well, I'm biased,
but I think the other thing is that it's part of, I work in an engineering environment, and part of the engineering process is to refine your thinking.
Yes.
And I recognise this about the way I think. I'll have a vague idea, and I like to test it with other people. So I'll share a kind of a half-baked idea with somebody, and I'll note their reactions, and if there's a positive reaction, then I'll do more thinking. But if I've been doing a technical thing and I'm looking at the engineering, what I want people to challenge it. I want somebody to go, well, what about this and what about that? That's why we work in teams.
Yes.
And everybody, and I feel nervous if it goes through unchallenged without somebody, because there's no way, particularly with something that's very sort of complex, that I would have thought of absolutely everything.
Right.
So I want somebody to kind of go, well, have you thought about this? Sometimes I will have thought about it, and so I can give the rationale for my thinking.
Yeah.
But other times I'll be like, oh, right, no, I haven't. And so you've got, that's the benefit in working with a variety of people, because they'll see things that you haven't seen.
Yes.
And vice versa. And the solution ends up better for it, because you're refining the design. And I think it's probably the same for almost any type of decision making, developing strategy, kind of moving organisations in particular directions, sharing your idea and getting feedback on that idea to make it a better idea is what we should all be striving for. It's very complacent, very arrogant to think that you've got all of the answers and you don't need feedback from anyone else. So the more diverse groups of people that you deal with, the more variety of feedback that you're going to get, and therefore the better the solution is.
Yes, I agree. Lastly, a general question about the future of the digital world. What are some of your biggest anxieties about the future of the digital world?
Actually, I do have a genuine anxiety at the moment, which is around artificial intelligence.
Right.
I think artificial intelligence is a very exciting area. It's got a lot of potential, and it's actually got potential to iron out maybe some human biases, because computers, in theory, are logical. They're not emotional beings, so you can give them the data. The problem that we have is that our data is biased. If you only need to sort of go and Google any job in images for any job in Google Images. So go and look up, I don't know, nursing. The majority of images will probably be of women. If you go and Google CEO, the majority of images will be of white men. And actually, I did a presentation a few months ago where I Googled CEO or boardroom, and I wanted imagery of boardrooms with a really diverse set of people from different ethnicities and different genders and non-binary people and maybe somebody in a wheelchair and so on. And I couldn't find anything that came anywhere close to fitting the bill. So when I gave my presentation, I put an empty boardroom up on the slide.
Wow.
And if we're using these data sets to train the machine, and we don't notice that the data we're feeding it is biased, then artificial intelligence is not going to be better than humans. It's going to be worse than humans.
Might enforce the problem.
It amplifies the problem, exactly. And the thing about human beings is we're deeply inconsistent, whereas machines are not.
Yes.
And when machines start training machines, we've kind of amplified this bias, and it's going to be very difficult to take it out. So we need more diversity in tech, more diversity in leadership. But for me, there's a burning platform around artificial intelligence.
Right.
We've got a window of opportunity to address that now, before it becomes a mainstream thing, and like I said before, machines start training the machines, and it's very difficult for them to be able to take the bias out once it's out there.
Okay.
So that's kind of like, I guess, one of my call to arms. It's I try not to share the anxiety, but I have genuine worries about that.
It is a growing anxiety. That's true. There's the sort of the data we put into these machines for learning. Maybe James, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.